Hello. We are quite enthusiastic about how our conversations, theological conversations, our dialogues, particularly the dialogue between the Orthodox and the Catholic, advances. Indeed, since several decades ago, since the Vatican II at least, we have reached an agreement on many issues that we believe to be unsurmountable, divisive, church-dividing issues, such as filioque, such as the primacy. We have, even if we have not solved those issues completely, we at least get closer to such a solution, and this gives us hope that one day the unity between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church can be restored. And we believe that theology is a kind of shortcut to that unity. We believe that theology works like a magic wand. It makes miracles. It can transform the water of our disunity into the wine of our unity overnight or over an hour, the moment we reach a theological agreement, the moment we agree that we agree upon everything that used to divide us. However, is this true? Does theology work this way? We assume that it can work this way, that this magic may happen because we believe it happened in the past. Because we believe in the past the parts of the church, chunks of the church, separated from each other because of theology. Because some theologians disagreed on some theological matters, eventually this led the church to get divided, to get fragmented. And we believe, just in the way how theology divided the church in the past, it can reunite the church in the present. Hence is our strive to reach a theological agreement, common theological understanding about the matters. And probably this strive, this hope, is not groundless. We are supposed to believe in theology. We should believe in theology. Theology matters. Theology is important, and indeed, theology was important in the past. However, maybe in the past theology was more important than it is nowadays. It's not good, but it's a fact. It's a matter of fact. Theology does not matter for many in the church to the same extent that it mattered in the past to many in the church. However, it is still doubtful that even in the past theology mattered that much as that we believe it to do. Anyways, nowadays theology seems to be less important for many in the church. Theology is a kind of hobby for many. It's also a profession for some, and it doesn't seem to affect very much the vast majority in the churches, in both in the East and in the West. Therefore, we can reach an agreement in a theological dialogue, but it does not necessarily translate into the church unity. We have seen it in our dialogue with the Oriental churches. The dialogue between the Byzantine and Oriental Eastern Christians so far has been one of the most successful, I believe, among the ecumenical dialogues, bilaterals. In 1989 in Anba Bishoy, and then in 1990 in Chambézy, we agreed that basically there are no differences, theological differences between us, and we should restore unity immediately. And this restoration did not happen. It still does not happen. And we are the same far from unity, the restoration of unity, now as we were before Chambézy agreements in 1990, even though we agreed that there are no theological differences between us. Why it is so? I think we need to study this case of um, theology not translating into unity, the case pertinent to the Byzantine Oriental dialogue, in order to understand what will be next, what will follow after we reach, assume, the agreement between the Orthodox and the Catholics. My own interpretation why we did not succeed in the restoration of unity following the Chambézy agreements in 1990 is that, first, theology does not matter nowadays in the same way as it mattered in the past, in the time when the division between the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonians happened starting in the 5th century. Then theology has been, at that time, theology had formed an identity. So the divisions over the Chalcedon had created identities, distinct identities, like Byzantine, Chalcedonian, and anti-Chalcedonian identities, and they clashed with one another. And even after theology was forgotten, theology stopped to play its leading role. The identities remained, and they still remain. They are still here, and they still shape the popular imagination of the people, how the communities of the Copts, Armenians, Ethiopians, Greeks, Romanians, Ukrainians, and so forth imagine themselves. They imagine themselves in the identity terms, not really in the theological terms. Theology still underpins it somehow, and there are theologians who know the things and who understand theology, but for the majority of people, theology doesn't really mean the same, and what means for them is identity. We need to envisage the continuation, the preservation of the same identities after we reach a theological agreement with one another. I mean, the Orthodox and the Catholics. So we need to pay really an attention to the identities that permeate our communities, that shape our communities, and probably together with restoring theological consensus, we need to think about tackling identities and maybe even challenging identities that still divide us. There is, I think, an oversimplification when we think that theology, that only theology mattered in the past, when theology had divided Christianity. Of course, there is an increasing number of studies that demonstrate that not only theology played its role in the division of the church in the past, like in the 5th century. Other factors like language also played its role. I would suggest that our modern understanding of how society works, of how collective memories work, can help us to also to tackle how the theological dialogue can go forward and how in the past the divisions occurred. Like, for example, one of the burning issues that divides Christian communities even more maybe than theological differences are ideologies. The Catholic Church in the United States is polarized along the ideological lines of the culture wars. The same applies to other communities like the Orthodox. Even the Orthodox community is much smaller in the United States. It is still divided along the same lines of culture wars. This counterposition, this antagonism between liberals or progressives and conservatives and so forth. And this is a very serious rift, new divisive line, which goes along the traditional theological lines. And this rift can impede our rapprochement with one another. Now we have, of course, to deal with the unity of our own communities, how to preserve, how to restore this unity, in addition to how to restore the unity between the Orthodox and the Catholic and other confessions. So it's another thing that needs to be taken into consideration, and that also happened in the past, I believe, because I think if we look at the process of the reception or rejection of the Council of Chalcedon, I think it was influenced by what we now call culture wars, what we now call ideologies, even though, of course, the culture wars and ideologies did not exist at that time. However, the culture wars and ideology were expressed through theological terms. They were rendered through theological dogmas. Take an example, the way how the legacy of St. Cyril of Alexandria was taken and interpreted and furthered in different communities. I believe that two interpretations of St. Cyril's language about the incarnation, those two interpretations were to a great extent shaped by ideological preferences. The Christological language of St. Cyril was quite vague, quite unclear, and gave a lot of room for different interpretations. So one of them interpreted this language as compatible with the language of two natures of Jesus Christ. And this interpretation was promoted and became a mainstream interpretation of the Council of Chalcedon, which I believe, and the entire Chalcedonian party, was quite liberal in the modern terms, or open-minded in its attitude to the legacy and the language of St. Cyril of Alexandria. And of course, it built upon this open-mindedness, the bridge between East and West, because, well, the Western Church, the Roman Church particularly, was quite decisive and clear about using only two natures language. So the Council of Chalcedon, in order to bridge East and West, in order to bridge Constantinople and Rome, exactly used this language of two natures and interpreted with this language the legacy of St. Cyril of Alexandria. Another faction, though, which was more conservative, which was more verbatim, as it were, to interpret the legacy, the language of Cyril of Alexandria, refused to render his language as a two natures language, and insisted that Cyril spoke about only one nature in Jesus Christ, and therefore we also should speak only about one nature of Jesus Christ. And they were quite conservative in their attitude to St. Cyril of Alexandria. Hence is the clash between the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian groups. They disagreed with one another on the way how to interpret the language of Cyril of Alexandria to allow more openness, more creativity, as it were, in interpretation of this language, or to stick to the letter of St. Cyril and to be conservative in this literal interpretation of St. Cyril. So the division, Christological division in the 5th century, was not therefore just theological. It was also ideological, as we can see, and continues to be, and will continue to be, and it will affect the way how we'll try to overcome our divisions between the Orthodox and the Catholics. So this ideological frame would be important, and therefore I believe, in order to achieve a unity, we need really to differentiate clearly, and if possible, to get rid of this ideological framework that I believe impedes our rapprochement, impedes achieving unity. It divides. This ideological polarization divides our communities now. It will even more divide us and impede us on our way to unity if we ignore those frameworks. So we need to address them. We need to tackle them. We need to, let me put it this way, to to purify theology from ideology. Of course, the question is if it is possible at all. I doubt. But at least we need to try, and at least we need to clearly understand what is the difference between ideology and theology, not to confuse them, and not to allow them to impede our advance to the unity. There is another non-theological language, modern language, language that comes from political philosophy, from political theology, if you want, that may help us in our dialogue to understand the processes in the past, how the division happened, and how it may not happen again. I particularly mean the language which is um, which has become very popular and maybe overused. That is the language of postcolonialism, postcolonial philosophy, postcolonial theology. Well, of course, it may immediately raise the question how postcolonialism is relevant to what we are discussing here, to purely theological discussions, or even the discussions related to the East-West relationship. I believe it is relevant, can be relevant, and moreover, I believe that if we ignore this dimension of the dialogue, we can really get stuck in our movement towards unity. Because, well, if we look at the events of the 5th century, the division, the kind of the prototypical division that happened in the global Christianity, that eventually was replicated in the division between East and West in the 11th century, or around 11th century. We cannot be precise when the great schism between East and West happened. Nevertheless, if we look at the processes in the 5th century, we can interpret them exactly in postcolonial terms or colonial terms. Of course, the people at the time would not use this language, would not think about themselves in the postcolonial or colonial terms. That's what we project upon them from our own experience, from our own understanding and knowledge. But I think this projection is not completely anachronistic. It can be useful. Because, for example, if you look at the resistance of the Egyptians and Syrians against the Council of Chalcedon, it looks like almost like an anti-colonial struggle. Anti-colonial war resistance. People in Alexandria or in Antioch could perceive Constantinople or Rome as the centers of colonial power, of colonization. Well, Egypt had been colonized not very long before that, and by the Romans, and the feeling was still there. The feeling of being oppressed, of being colonized, basically. And this feeling in the Christian era translated into theological dissatisfaction, or the attempt to create their own theological language identity, as we can observe among the Copts, for example, starting with, for example, the activity of people like Shenouda the Great. And the entire struggle of Shenouda and other Copts, I would interpret them, among other things, as a kind of anti-colonial struggle. And therefore, if we want to undo the division that happened in the 5th century, we should probably address it also in the post-colonial terms. We should speak about those divisions also as a result of colonization. And if we want to undo the division, we need to kind of speak about decolonization, also decolonization of theology. Of course, it may sound a bit too cheap, too kind of populist, but I think it may make sense. The same applies to maybe to the relations between East and West in the sense of Orthodox and Catholics, because, as we know, not the anathemas of 1054 really divided the churches, East and West. Those anathemas passed almost unnoticed in the Christian East or in the Christian West. What really mattered what really alienated East and West was the Fourth Crusade. The conquest, the capture of Constantinople in 1204, and from the Eastern perspective at least, it looked like an occupation of Constantinople and colonization of Constantinople. Colonization also imposes the colonizer's identity, religion, way of life, values, and so forth. That's what we exactly observe with in the Fourth Crusade, when the Latin ways were enhanced. It doesn't mean that they didn't exist in Constantinople. They did exist in Constantinople even before the Fourth Crusade, but after the Fourth Crusade, they were forcefully imposed. They were enforced together with the papal Roman jurisdiction, Roman theology, and so forth, and Roman brute military force. So, in a sense, the occupation of Constantinople in the 13th century looked like an act of colonization before the classical colonization, of course, happened. And at least the trauma that the Greeks lived through and continue to live with looks in its symptoms as a colonial trauma. And their struggle against the Western Church, their struggle against the Catholic Church, which continues to our days, looks like almost like anti-colonial struggle. Their fears, almost paranoia about the West, is a paranoia that we can observe among the colonized people. So this mentality of colonization and decolonization matters and should be, I think, taken into consideration if we want to add something to the ongoing theological dialogue in order to succeed with the restoration of the Christian unity. Or take my own country, Ukraine, from where I'm addressing you right now. Many Orthodox in Ukraine also perceive the Uniatism following the Council of Brest as a sort of a part of the colonization process. When the powerful Polish kingdom, Rzeczpospolita, imposed its rule, its political system, its identity, its language, and its religion upon the Ukrainian people. And the Union of Brest was a part of this imposition, a part of this process of colonization. And well, I could say that even now, the most recent developments about which you probably know in the Polish-Ukrainian relations, the tensions in those relations, I would interpret them exactly from the same perspective of, colonization, decolonization somehow. Of course, the Greek Catholic Church, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, nowadays has changed its standing completely. While in the 17th century and even later, it was an instrument of polonization, an instrument of kind of this imposition of colonial rule upon the Ukrainian people who were Orthodox and resisted this polonization by protecting and defending the Orthodoxy. After a while, the Greek Catholic Church became like switched the sides and became the proponent of the Ukrainian identity and the Ukrainian, anti-colonial struggle, and continues to be so. So it's kind of the switch of the roles of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church that occurred, which is really stunning. But still, in Ukraine, many perceive Catholicism, the Catholic Church, as a part of this colonial attempt in the past. And if we want really to change the attitude of the people towards the Western Church, I think we need to address this through the postcolonial perspective, from the postcolonial perspective. So that's another aspect that I would add that may help us to in carrying out our dialogue. So, speaking again about the magic wand of theology, theology cannot work on its own. This magic wand cannot make a miracle on its own. It needs to be supplemented with other non-theological discussions and factors, including postcolonial, including the discussions about identities, including, of course, the discussions about those historical legacies and that go back to the past and still torment our people. So we realized the importance of the non-theological factors in the wake of our dialogue with the Oriental churches. I mean, the Byzantine and the Oriental churches. We can learn a lot from the dialogue, and we can apply what we learn to the present discussions among the Orthodox and the Catholics. Well, I know it sounds like an extra task, extra work, and a lot of work. But I think we have to do this work, because otherwise we can be frustrated with achieving a theological agreement without achieving unity. In order to translate the theological agreements, the theological consensuses into church unity, we need to apply to involve other fields that I've mentioned, and they are not the only fields that need to be properly used. Therefore, a lot of work for Orientale Lumen in the future, and I wish us all every success in this work. Thank you for your attention.